This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already. Is this just teachers before an impending learning visit? Do you lose yourself? Or is it a regular day at the office for you? To unpack all this, let's align the views of teacher and observer with my special guest today. And as always, there's a chance for you to get involved.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, a very good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of the Sunday Lunch Show with me, Chris Wilkinson. And I'll be here on alternate Sundays to share with you the topics that I believe are very close to the heart of fellow teachers. Today, I will be discussing learning visits, and I have a very special guest with us today to discuss how learning visits can be perceived from an observer's point of view as well as a teacher's point of view. But before we do that, I would like to start with some well wishes to listeners who have recently celebrated key events in the calendar. And for this week, I would like to start with well wishes for those who have celebrated St. Patrick's Day. And I've seen a lovely quote on St. Patrick's Day. And the quote goes, "May your blessings outnumber the shamrocks that grow, and may trouble avoid you wherever you go." And I think that's actually a really nice sentiment at any time of the year, but particularly for St. Patrick's Day. So I know it was last Sunday, and I just want to wish everybody the best for that. I'd also like to extend my wishes to my dear listeners who are currently observing the period of Ramadan. And I'd just like to say, may Allah keep you away from harm and trouble. As you fast and pray on Ramadan, may all your sin be forgiven, and may you be blessed with peaceful life for each day ahead. So Ramadan Mubarak. So for today's show, I have chosen to discuss learning visits. Now, this comes off the back of a learning visit that I recently had in my teaching role, but it also is just on the back of several conversations that other teachers have had around teaching visits, and just to really have a bit of a discussion around that. And it got me thinking with learning visits. You may well be a new teacher, or you may well be a very experienced teacher. Now, I'm pleased to say that I am the latter. I am an experienced teacher and have been teaching now for 10 years. And when I reflected on my learning visit, and when I've spoke to initial teacher training students or ECTs, or even students who are out of their probation, but are still quite new to teaching, it suddenly dawned on me that learning visits do vary according to the person who is undergoing the learning visit. So as a new teacher, it may be that you just want to survive the learning visit. And I will later on tell you a story about my early experiences of learning visits and, how I got through them. And I don't have the same feelings now, because as an experienced teacher, instead of surviving, you actually want to thrive, don't you? You want to be the complete opposite. You want to show that you are at the prime of your, or the pinnacle of your practice. So we have different reasons for trepidation when it comes to learning visits. And so the reasons for trepidation change according to your experiences, but it can still be equally as daunting and as equally as nerve-wracking, just again for different reasons. So what I would like to do today is bring on my special guest in a little while. So my special guest today is called Helen, and she is a teaching and learning and innovation leader of St Helens College. And in her role, it's, as the observer, you spend a lot of time seeing it from the other side. And I think as teachers, we would love to hear more from the observer and how that works. So I would love to bring Helen on, and Helen will be with us in a little while. But it would be a good idea at this point to remind any new listeners and share with my with my regular listeners just how my shows will be formatted. So whilst today's topic will be, or the main feature of today's topic will be learning visits, I would also like to allocate a segment of the show to a shallow dive into a key observation or a key point that I've witnessed in the last week or so, and maybe use that opportunity to discuss it, and maybe if there's an appetite to look at doing a bit more on that topic in the future as well. So this week, my shallow dive is mock exams. Mock exams. Now, we have just recently done mock exams at my workplace, at my school, and we all have different experiences of this as well when it comes to teaching it. Now, in some schools, the mock exams will be a staple of the calendar, as is at our school, but the format or the process of it will vary according to how the leadership team want the mock exams to be carried out. Now, at my school, the plan is generally one, because we're sixth form centre in a FE college, so it is literally just A levels, and we have 21 subjects. And over the course of 1 week, the students will do one A level mock exam per subject, and what they essentially do is they will sit that one exam for the week, and then that's it. Now, the leadership team will allocate roughly 90 minutes per subject, but that can be extended if you want, or it can be less than 90 minutes. So the point is, we all have a degree of flexibility on how we assess our learners that week. And I take it as a point of saying, well, rather than giving them a full paper, especially when it might have just been a week or so before that they were learning this material, it might be a bit difficult to give them a full paper. Now, you can see why staff or teachers would want to give a full paper, because you want to give them the full exam experience. And if they're going to make mistakes with timing, this is the time to do it. I take it from a rather different angle, and I look at it as a way of saying, well, let's just get used to doing this particular topic in an exam condition. Now, I teach A-level politics, and for a 10-mark question, it's about 20 minutes in the real exam. I give them 25. There's a degree of flexibility to give them 30 minutes for the 10-mark question in my mock exam. And yeah, the results are a little bit inflated, but I also feel that if you give them a full paper and it's the first time they've done it, the results can go another way as well. And I just think it's about giving them confidence to do do part of the paper to begin with. And the way I see it is, can we give them a paper to do where they at least get to experience the questions, and they get to they get to experience the structure and just really get a feel for that subject. And we already did one in December as well, and that's a staple. So we actually do 2 mock exams in 1 year. So it's whereas I will have a conversation with somebody else on the teaching staff who will say, actually, no, I'm going to give them a full paper, and it takes them forever to mark it, and when they come back, the results are a little bit difficult to understand why perhaps maybe they got that. But at the same time, the students have then gone through the whole process of, right, I need to do more. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. And I don't always think it's necessary for them to be streamlined as well. So everyone shouldn't do a full paper, or everyone shouldn't have extra time, or whatever. And as a result of that, I think it can be a bit messy. I think the mock exams can be a bit messy, and from a student who maybe I share, say, a politics student with a sociology. I share a politics student with a sociology student, and I have a chat with a sociology teacher who might give them a full paper. Then they've had a different experience in the different subjects, but it can be a bit messy. But I think as long as they come out of it knowing what they need to do in each question, I think that is always the way to consider it. So, if anyone has any comments or any points to make about mock exams, there is an option to text in. If you are listening to this back on demand, I will, for the first time today, give you my Twitter handle, and you feel free to use that to give any comments about anything that you have. So my Twitter handle is capital C, so it's Chris, CHRIS _W 1987. So that's at Chris _ W1987. And if you are listening on demand, at the end of the show, I will post what your views are of the show, and feel free to comment. If you are listening live, there's an option to text in if you would like to give any comments about anything relating to mock exams.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
So I'd like to dedicate the next segment of the show before we bring Helen onto our show to just quickly return back to the points that were made in the last show that we did. So the last show that I did was around adaptive teaching and the extension or the removal of the phrase differentiation, and how dramatically different differentiation is from adaptive teaching. And the comments I made last time were just as a headline figures for this, that the way that we looked at differentiation is different. So if we took data from teachers who adopted differentiation, we can see that the students who were achieving the less grades and were considered low achievers, there was a ceiling to their talent, to what they were able to do. And that was proven by some of the results that were coming out. Whereas adaptive teaching is adapted and growing in real time, and being able to not necessarily produce 2 or 3 different lesson plans prior to that to allow for differentiation, but really instead just to provide or to take a cap off the ability of learners and be able to get them to explore the full program. And at the end of the show, I put out a comment on Twitter, and I just asked for people's views on how they adapt teaching. Now, some previously listened to the show, and some just got on board with the question, because how I phrased it was not on the basis of the show, tell me what you think. Instead, it was more just simply, how do you adapt your teaching? And I got an absolute ton of responses, and I'm afraid to say I can't read them all out, of course, and I'm really, really happy to say that, because I think it's a good problem to have, and I think anybody who is listening, please feel free to share your views with me, and I'll always do my best to air them. Now, I did have some that wanted to remain anonymous, so I will start with the anonymous ones before I move into those who were quite happy for me to share their details, or their name at least, on today's show. So my first comment was from an anonymous source, and she told me that the way that she adapts teaching is by just making sure that she never sits down in the classroom. And I thought this was a really interesting point, because I think it is possible, of course, for teachers to sit down in the middle of a lesson. It might be that they're all working on something, and you might take an opportunity to just dip into your emails. If something's particularly prevalent that day, you might want to just check the emails up to date, because and whatever. So of course, there's opportunities to do that, but she told me that she never does that. In fact, her computer, once she's done the register, the computer is locked, and that's it. She's in the moment with them. And I thought this was really interesting, because she said it's tiring. Of course it is. But she will often just wander around and really just checking that the learners are on board with things. And she's found, since doing that a lot more students are confident. And I say students, by the way, might call them pupils, learners, whichever phrase you're comfortable with. So your students are more likely to ask a question, because what they don't have to do is raise their hand and potentially wait there for a minute or two for you to respond to that. And it all ties in with the evidence-based education, when you talk about maximizing learning opportunities. And it was about the opportunity isn't wasted, because they ask the question, the answer's answered. And it's an excellent way of putting that. And I thought that was really good. And I'm going to try that myself. And when I say that, I probably do anyway. I find that I tend not to sit down a lot, but it's easy to do if you say, I don't know, give them a comprehension activity, set of questions. They might just, there might be a time, especially in the first, say, 5 or 10 minutes, to take a moment and do whatever it is that you need as part of your job. But I'm going to try that, and or at least be conscious of when I am about to sit down. And I thought that was a really good point. So thank you very much for that. And the second point, or the second comment that really rang a bell with me, was that it was from another anonymous source. And what he told me was that when part of his adaptive teaching is to say no to students whenever they get something wrong. Just say no. No, that is not correct. Now, he did tell me that this does come with a bit of a disclaimer. Okay. He did make the point that any of his learners that are, who will not respond well to no, it's knowing that. And again, it's about creating that, is what evidence-based education would say, is that it's supportive environment. So you don't want to say no to somebody who isn't going to respond well to that. Of course you're not. But yeah, he says no. And he says in the very first lesson that he has with them, if you're wrong, I will say no. But I will never say no in a way where, you feel that you need to, address yourself or check yourself or whatever. It's a very supportive no. So, I don't know, how would you say this? What's 2 plus 2? Perhaps if you're in a phase of primary school, what's 2 plus 2? 4. Wonderful. If we triple that, what do we get? 11. No. Try again. 13. No. 12. Bingo. And, just saying no is perhaps a way to adapt teaching as well, because, learners know that if they get it wrong, they say no. So we will say no, but it's also encouraging them to undertake a period of self-reflection whenever they do get it wrong, and it's building that resilience as well. And I thought that was a really, really good point, and I was very, very happy to take that advice as well, because we can often say no in a way that doesn't really help the learner. So you could say good, but what about this? When actually, is it good? Do they need to know that it's wrong? Again, there's a way to do it, of course. But I really like that. So thank you very much for that comment. And my final comment that was raised today was from my colleague, who I work with indirectly. We don't actually work directly with each other, but we both are contributors to the Politics Review magazine on with Hodder Education. And I put out a message. I put out this message, and he actually replied on LinkedIn with this one. And I said, how do we adapt teaching? And he's called David. So thank you very much for your comments, David. He replied and said that as an international teacher, that he has to consider context for the different learners of different nationalities. And I never once thought of international students when looking at adaptive teaching, mainly because I don't really teach a lot of international students. We do have a cohort from Norway, but they tend not to do A-level politics. So I tend not to spend a lot of time with international students. So it wasn't on my forethought to think of them, but actually it's a really good point. And we do see an influx of international students in colleges and schools because of various different reasons. We've had a huge cohort from Ukraine, for example, who may one day, once they understand English to a higher degree, might come on to do A-levels or GCSEs or whatever. So for the teachers listening who have international students, what David said was that he takes the context of that. Now, he did give an example. He didn't put it on the comments on LinkedIn, but as I spoke to him afterwards, he did, as he spoke after, he did make the comment that it's not just the language, but just being mindful that in, for example, Ukraine, you may say one thing, and for example, in Italy, you may say another, and it's taken in completely different contexts. So it's knowing how to do that. Now, I think this is a little bit like differentiation, though, in some degree, because you can take a moment in real time to check yourself or make sure that that information's landed. But you may need to write this on a group profile or lesson plan, that certain words may need to be checked before going out there. And I'm not going to give you an example of any words because, as I said, I don't have any experience of this. But as an international teacher, or a teacher of international students, it may be that certain words do come out. And some words, and it might be that you only learn after the fact that it is something that needs to be addressed. But I think when I spoke to some of my teachers of international students on the back of this comment, one thing that they did say was that it's often when there's a religious connotation that it can be that this can be misconstrued and can be problematic. So it's knowing when to avoid things of religious connotations, which can have a big impact as well. So David, thank you very much for that comment. And as always, on the back of this show, I will provide a link for you to make some comments on anything regarding learning visits today as well. And if for whatever reason anybody would like to make comments real time, please do so throughout the show, and I'll make sure that them comments get addressed on the show. Now, finally, before we move on and look at the main event today, with regards to adaptive teaching last week, I actually went to a CPD session midweek after the show, and it was from our teaching and learning team, and they did a show on this. And one comment that was made was I found really fascinating, and I wanted to share this with you, just because of how much it hit me when I heard it. And it's just probably sometimes, or perhaps maybe a really obvious point, but the English curriculum compared to other parts of the world is just getting heavier and heavier. Now, when I say the English curriculum, I don't just mean if you open up an A-level politics specification that it is going to be heavier with more things. We already knew that. Or if you're looking at a GCSE maths paper, it may have more on than it did 10 years ago. So content-wise, yes, it is getting heavier. But no, I just meant the wider issues that we have to consider as well. And I would very much like to pick Helen's brain on this if today, if possible, just to see how she feels about this as well in terms of her observations. But the wider things that need to be put on the curriculum today are things like, are teachers aware of the environmental issues that we have to address now as well? Are teachers familiar with or how to incorporate things like fundamental British values and how to include aspects of fundamental British values like the rule of law and such? And are we competent enough to do this? Are we happy to do this? I have a tutorial group once a week, and I've recently been doing carbon literacy with them, and my scheme of learning has an element where we have to consider carbon literacy as well. So if there's an opportunity to bring it in, we shall. Now, we never seem to take things off the curriculum, do we? So it always just seems to be added. So whilst green or carbon literacy has been added, certain things haven't been taken off. Now, you may argue that things like fundamental British values should never be taken off. And I'm certainly not here to advocate that it should be taken off. No. But what I'm saying is that there never seems to be an opportunity to take things off when, perhaps maybe it's past its date or whatever. So teachers are now, as well as their content, as well as their heavy content, having to consider other things as well. And I wonder if that is reflected in the learning visits that we look at today. I wonder if that is reflected in the turnover of maybe teachers. I don't know. And perhaps maybe that's not a question for today, but it may come up as a point anyway, that there's more pressure on teachers to learn more than perhaps, or to include more than perhaps they did even 2, 3, 4 years ago. And how much are they assessed on how much they know about things perhaps, or perhaps that we're not qualified in, So there's always that to consider, and we will certainly be looking at that as we go through today. So we are going to move on and look at teacher and learner visits very shortly, and it'll be a great pleasure to have Helen to appear on the show.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC News website features a long read on the topic of school buildings and fears that some schools will miss out on a rebuild. The last places on a scheme to rebuild schools in England are reported to have gone to schools with issues caused by reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, or RAC. This has left some school leaders frustrated and unions accusing the government of cutting corners by using existing schemes to deal with a new problem. The government says it has invested £15 billion in school buildings since 2015, and the School Rebuildings Programme, known as SRP, aims to rebuild or refurbish 500 schools in a decade. The first 99 were selected by the DFE in 2021, having been identified as in the worst condition. Local authorities and school trusts were then invited to nominate schools in 2022. Around 300 schools were successful. 797 schools were rejected but hoped to be chosen in subsequent selection rounds. However, for many, they were disappointed not to be named in the final list of 110 schools. In recent months, it has emerged that 106 out of the 110 have been affected by RAC. Head teachers leading in crumbling, ageing buildings are disappointed. They are coping with leaking roofs, temporary buildings and plumbing issues. The article reports on 3 schools from across England who have all missed out. In Northern Ireland, unions representing further education lecturers have voted to reject what they describe as an insulting pay offer. Members of the UCU and the NASUWT have been offered a 5% increase plus an unconsolidated payment of £1,500. Both unions have called on the Economy Minister to engage with them to close an education pay gap. Earlier this month, there was a formal offer on school teachers' pay, but union leaders say that in FE, staff have watched the pay gap widen for far too long. The NASUWT's General Secretary, Dr Patrick Roach, said FE lecturers in Northern Ireland are fed up with being treated as second-class teachers. FE Week also reports on the sector with an article focusing on the government's plan for a new Advanced British Standard qualification. College membership bodies and school leaders' unions have released responses to the government consultation on the proposal, which closed last week. The plan was announced by Rishi Sunak last year, that the ABS would replace T-levels and A-levels in around 10 years' time, although an upcoming election may change all this. Both the NAHT and ASCL have released their responses, focusing on concerns that the new proposals are clunky and that they undermine the parity of esteem between academic and technical education, and that without investment in recruitment are also unworkable. Under the plan, students would study a set of subject majors and minors, with all required to study English and maths to the age of 18. Unions also warned against considering reform in isolation, and that it should be considered as part of a whole, from EYFS to Key Stage 5. Full details can be found on the FE Week website, whilst a similar article in the TES focuses on comments by Exam Board OCR due to concerns of teacher recruitment and school space needed to deliver ABS. OCR says that there are opportunities for change, but that it disagrees with government proposals. It also expressed the view that the A-level name should be kept due to its strong and growing international reputation. For further analysis, you can read more on the TES magazine website. Finally, student loans are in the news again after an FOI request from the BBC revealed the highest outstanding student debt is more than £230,000. The figures also reveal that another loan holder has accumulated nearly £55,000 worth of interest. The student loans company says graduates in England leave university with an average debt of just under £45,000. The FOI request was for details of the highest amount of student debt owed for each of the 5 student loan plans on offer. The amount graduates repay and the length of the loan vary from plan to plan and depend on when and where they went to university and their degree type. The figures have sparked debate again amongst many students, graduates and others. It's almost 15 years since tuition fees were tripled in England. Fees now cost a maximum of £9,250 in England. Debts are written off at the end of loan terms, but this is usually after 30 years. The student loans company processes around 1.5 million loan applications per year. A spokesperson for the website Save the Student described the high figures for outstanding debt as eye-watering, and the NUS said the system discourages people from working-class backgrounds from going to university. The Department for Education said its reforms mean no graduate will pay back more than they borrowed when inflation is taken into account. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Welcome back, and everyone. Now let's turn our attention to the heart of today's discussion, learning visits. This topic has been embedded into day-to-day practice since time immemorial, and it's always something that, again, we always look at as teachers as, is it for us? Is it for them? Who is it for? And just really getting to understand the heart of things. So I'm pleased to share with you that I've got Helen on the line today. So hello, Helen.
Hello there, you okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm pleased to say we can hear you okay. So everything seems to be all good and ready to go. So for the benefit of our listeners, Helen, I'm just wondering if you can just share with me your role and how learning visits are a part of your day-to-day role.
Okay, so within my role, I work as a head of teaching, learning, development and innovation. And part of that is about the quality and standards of teaching and developing excellence within teaching for our student experience and our staff experience as well. And then the process around welcoming new staff, so the staff induction process, ensuring that they feel supported. So whether in our FE environment we have staff that come in from industry, so they may have been working as a plumber or a midwife, and then they make that transition into education, supporting them with the understanding of the teaching practices and the craft and the art of teaching, and any sort of training needs around that. Or whether it be that we've got staff that have come in from other colleges and they may be experienced, but they need just to have a bit of an insight into our procedures and the different policies that we have or the different sort of tools we use. There's so many different things out there, just Pro Monitor and OneGrade and OneNote and all those various tools. And it's just that welcome induction that staff feel that they're aware of how to use the tools, how to, what our standards are in terms of our teaching practice and our expectations as a college. And that all kind of lies in with the EAF, but it also lies in with our high standards and our high expectations for our staff and students, raising aspirations, and looking at the standards of teaching within that. So it's everything from assessment, feedback, planning, documentation, in the classroom practice, collaborations with students, sharing good practice and developmental practice for our teachers and our educators within the college.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. Now, I sort of looked at this topic and thought, well, I'll tell you why, the main reason why I wanted to look at this topic was, it wasn't just because of, the learning visits that I might have experienced recently or other members of staff. That is part of it. But also I read a brilliant article from Think Further, and it was from a gentleman called Chris Morrison, and he wrote an article that said, can lesson observations be a tool for improvement rather than just accountability? And I just thought it was a really good article. And one statistic that really stuck out at me, really threw me, was that the general feeling was that amongst lecturers, now, just for context for everybody, this was about an FE survey, but when I've looked at other surveys, they are very similar in terms of how teachers perceive learning visits. And one thing that he found was that many lecturers felt that learning visits were a box ticking exercise and that it was something done to them rather than something for them. Now, I would imagine, Helen, you're quite frustrated to hear that, given that your role is to or your role is very much to do the opposite, isn't it? Really.
So I think as educators, no matter when you come in to be working with education and you're working with students, if you've done some sort of teacher training course, a big part of that teacher training course is being observed, whether you're being observed by a mentor, whether you're being observed by the university that's giving you that qualification. Part of that process is observation. And then within that, you do peer observation. So you might do a micro teach or a mini teach, and you observe each other, your other peers in the room that are learning to become teachers and work in that practice. Yeah. And I think for me, it's seeing it as that it's a developmental thing from the start. So no matter what sort of observation you're having, whether it's a learning walk and it's a short, just seeing that something's happening in the classroom, whether it's a supportive classroom visit or a developmental observation, whether it's a formal observation as part of the quality assurance process or an offset inspector from the external side of things, looking at the standards of teaching and learning and putting a kind of assumption around how that lesson went and the delivery of what was there and what was learning was taking place, visible progress. Overall, the whole purpose of another person being in the classroom, whether it's a peer tutor, whether it's a trainee teacher, an offset inspector or a member of the senior leadership team, your manager, for me, it's all about development. And within education, we cannot stand still. So when we had lockdown and we all went online, many teachers had to learn to adapt their craft to be able to make it online. They made videos, they made TikToks, we used Instagram. We got creative in our tools to ensure education could still take place. And now, like you said before, around trying to include other things in your teaching practice. So yes, we've got our fundamental British values, careers, the local labour markets, how we link with stakeholders, how teachers assess and plan for assessment, how they adapt their teaching practice in their classroom, how they use starting points to influence their activity, and they stretch and challenge students who may have been quite experienced in that skill. So how they stretch that student who's experiencing that skill or that knowledge, but then how they still incorporate that learning for the students that maybe don't feel as confident So we do have to do a lot as teachers, and I still do teach as part of my role. So I can appreciate just how much work and effort we put in. Because, now again with AI, how do we incorporate EdTech? How do we incorporate AI? Some staff maybe, or some organisations may not use it as much. But for me, using that immersive environment and encouraging staff to explore ways of using VR, immersive rooms, immersive technologies to expand the student experience can't be a bad thing if it's done correctly and within the perimeters of the boundaries of what the expectations and what the policies state or the strategies state within the organisation. So I think no matter who's in your room, there's always some area of development, either for the person who's being observed or for the person who's observing them, because they may be observing them on a good practice. Yeah. They want to develop their own skills, and that tutor's been identified as someone who does this really well, and they then leave that room gaining a positive experience for all.
It's really interesting to see that you still teach, and I think that's so important, and I'm really glad to hear that, because I think in some roles, I know I'm thinking of in my workplace, but obviously other places as well, there is a disconnect sometimes between teachers and TLA, because maybe the TLA staff aren't teaching anymore. So it's really good to hear you say that, and I actually think it's absolutely important that wherever you are in the school system, that you should still have that face-to-face contact with students. So I think that's brilliant. And actually, to pick up on the point about when you're doing the initial teacher training, that that you are observed from that point onwards, you're right. And I think teachers, we never ever stop being observed, and as you're right, we should never stand still. It is lifelong learning, and that's the point of it. But I think from a teacher point of view, even from the early days, from an initial teacher training right the way through to now, like I said, the point I said at the top of the program was that there's still that trepidation. Now, do you, as part of your role, how much do you expect there to be teachers who are a little bit nervous when you come in? How much do you, I don't know if the word allow was the right word for it, but how much do you factor that in to when you observe?
So I think with anything, when you're in an environment, especially if it's not a common practice, so as part of our organisation at St Helens College, we want to make this a common practice. So we have our support experiments in learning to try and encourage that culture of staff being present in the room. I know in another college in Scotland, they've got 3 hours between two of their sites. So where they've paired up people to observe each other in one organisation, they use 360 video cameras, and all the observations are done on a tripod with a video camera. So there isn't a person present in the room. So different organisations observe their staff using different methods. I think if you've got an actual physical person in your room and that makes you nervous as a teacher, then sometimes we have to look and reflect on our own self as teachers. What is it that's causing you to feel that way? Is it a lack of confidence within your own belief and your self-belief? Is it the fact that you're new in the role and it's a kind of experience, you don't feel as experienced as you would like to be, so you put pressure on yourself? But it's allowing that dialogue between you and your manager and you and your staff team. So we have staff that request supportive classroom visits. So it's not a graded observation. It's just can you come in my class and just give me some feedback on this? Or I'm introducing this in my class. Can you just come and see if it's working? And it's about having that culture where it is seen as a supportive experience rather than the fear of, like you said before, ticking a box or being judged. Because ultimately, there is, whether you get graded as a teacher or not, or whether you get an outcome where, in your organisation, what grades do you have? Do you get a grade or do you just get feedback?
Well, it's interesting because we're not graded, but when you get the feedback, they will tell you if you're exceeding expectations, if you are meeting expectations, or if you're not quite meeting expectations. I don't know what the third one is. I don't know how that's worded, but it's almost like it's a three-way option really. So no, you're not graded, but you are told where you are in terms of expectations. So I don't know if you would see that as a grade or not, but I know the traditional one was, what was it? Requires improvement, good, outstanding. We don't have that anymore.
No,
but you still know where you stand, as it were.
Yeah, and I think that's with most schools or FEs or any educational establishment, there will be an element of some form of feedback that either then forwards the action of an action plan, or improvement plan or developmental plan. So where that educator's been seen as being exceedingly, competent within questioning, they may get some praise around that and some feedback around the positive side of it. They may not have been so experienced with other skills, or in that time frame, it had been captured around those other skills, and they may be seen that needs to be developed.
Yeah.
So if they've been questioning, it's just been kind of low-level questioning with no probing, no think, pair, share, just that kind of service level questioning. It may be that the observer will put down a little note to say, maybe expand your questioning styles. They may include questioning around blooms or metacognitive questioning, or one of those thinking hats, or whatever it is that is needed for that sort of activity that's being observed at that time. If there are missed opportunities, all it is about giving those tips and those ideas around how that could have been a more effective, more in-depth, more developed experience for the staff and the student to get more learning or more evidence of learning or more assessment. So I think no matter what happens in a classroom, learning is taking place, whether it's on a computer, whether it's in a workshop, whether it's in a classroom where the tutors are leading it or students are doing some independent research. There tends to be an objective or an aim or some purpose around that session. And it's about how the students start that session knowing little about it and how they end that session knowing more. So we look at the starting points, we look at the visible progress, we look at what has been taught in that time frame, how the learners have learned that, how the students have experimented with that to develop their skills, knowledges, behaviours around whatever that topic may be.
Yeah, and absolutely, and you're right. There's progress made. It could more be made. Could it be done different? Yeah, correct. But you're right. The point is, progress is being made, and I don't know. I mean, perhaps maybe you're less privy to these sort of conversations now, given the role that you're in. But I know you're saying you still teach. But I know that so. The practice in our college is that regardless of who you are, so whether you've been, whether it's, whether you're an absolutely, as you say, coming in as from industry, coming in straight away, or whether or not you're someone like myself who's been doing it for so many years, there's still it's the same process, and you would imagine it would be, of course, but what happens is you get an email, and the email is the standard email just saying, dear, enter name, and then just everything's the same. So you have been selected for this. Please submit your information by this time and whatever else. And it's been affectionately known in my place as being, you've been pinged. So, I've been pinged and it's my turn. And one of my colleagues, and I asked her if I could talk about this on the show today, and she said yes, but keep me anonymous, and that's fair enough. But there's nothing bad anyway. But she said that when the observer left the room, the whole class almost just went, oh, and then her exact words were, and I made a mental note of this, was, we just got back to normal, and I just think it's. I don't know. It's just really sad, isn't it, to think that you can't be normal anyway, isn't it? Really.
I thought just So for me, if I go into the room, you encourage whoever it is to just continue to do their normal practice. Yeah. So maybe that's. I mean, from organisation to organisation, there may be a different culture around that. But I completely appreciate. I've worked in organisations before where you feel like you are. You feel like you're under the microscope a little bit and you don't want to do the wrong thing. Or some teachers try and cram everything in. So they try and cram in maths, English, prevent, British values, careers, because they want to tick all the boxes and they're panicking. But for me, it's that element of when you deliver a session and you've got your planned session and you can see that there's a planned session, whether it's resources, whether the students have got some form of assessment. If we can't just take away lesson visits or observations or whatever it is, because how can we quality assure? How can we make sure standards are where they need to be?
Absolutely.
As teachers, I couldn't imagine never walking into a session unplanned. I may adapt what I've planned, but there's always a plan. Yeah. Because that's how we're taught to do it. That's the kind of process we need. We need a plan to make sure that the scheduling of the work is correct, the scheduling of assessment is correct, the order of what's being taught flows correctly. Students are at the right sort of place in their tracking. So I think for anyone that feels that they can't be normal within the room, again, that's some search and discovery for them as an educator, for them personally, because or feeding that forward in your staff surveys to say that that's how it feels. So maybe there needs to be more of a relaxed approach building up to it, so staff are used to people being in their rooms more. Do you have it like every annual, like an annual cycle where you get seen every year, or is it?
Yeah, so so I'm just thinking about the last time I was observed, as in I got pinged, to quote the my staff. It was a year before that, so it was November 23, and then it was it was March 24. So yeah, it's once a year, and I think it's because they literally go around every member of staff, so it takes a year to do that, I think. But it's interesting. So the I find that with my my colleagues that in my observations of however the staff react to observations, and I've used the word observations twice to different things there, but in my experience of seeing how people react to being pinged, I think the more experienced teachers tend to be a bit more worried at times. Now, I think this is partly to blame, and I don't know if you agree with this or not. It might just be our experience. But when you said before about how teachers have to cram different things in, they used to have to do that, though. I mean, I remember when I first started teaching, we had a consultancy come in who were, you might have heard of them. They were called, I think, the BW consultants, I think they were called. And they were sort of paid to come in and pretend to be Ofsted. And the week before, or the morning of when they were coming around, we had a memo just basically saying, right, make sure you put what was the word? I can't remember what it even was at the time. It was pre fundamental British values, but it was, get your maths and English in. And so I remember in the middle of a politics class just going, right, let's add up this. What does that come to? And I would never have done that before. Or I would never do that in a normal lesson. So this was years ago, but I remember that. And maybe some of the old things still stick today. And do you think perhaps maybe CPD could be better used to try and debunk some of these myths that staff need to go through?
Again, I think it's around the processes of each organisation. So the kind of CPD that we offer, that our team offer, is all around that developmental side. So if we've gone and had a round of lesson visits, and from that we've seen lots of areas that need developing, whether it be across feedback and assessment, whether it be across questioning, and then we've also seen lots of effective practice around use of EdTech or questioning, we can then look at that data to say, right, this percentage of our staff has got areas of improvement in this area, so that's going to inform our CPD offer to help our staff who've got requires improvement or have got whatever outcome. I mean, we don't say that in ours, but if they need developmental support within that area, we put that CPD training on. And we have support sessions for staff. So it's almost like a drop-in where we can go and target support for staff that request it or would like it. Whether that's through management doing work scrutiny, or whether it's the staff team themselves doing it work scrutiny and they want a more consistent, cohesive approach. So I've been in my role since December, and we've kind of created a newsletter. We have an interactive TLA tile. We have sharing good practice. We have staff informing the CPD and what's available. And there are elements around the principles of instruction and rose and shine and the kind of the art and craft of teaching. But then there's also some nice teacher takeaways where it's practical ideas of, okay, how can I do that activity in my session? And they might be in a bricklaying session, or they might be in a catering kitchen. But it's how we can put strategies in place to support staff. So it's about it being supportive and developmental, rather than, like you said before, one of your colleagues feels like it's ticking a box and they can't be normal. That's something as an organisation that staff need to feedback in staff surveys, and they need to reflect on. Maybe do rather than having external deep dives, have internal staff peer like doing peer observations to get used to that environment. So you're used to someone being in your room. It could be that you have a colleague that works in maths that might go and see somebody in catering, or a colleague that works in geography that go and see somebody in, the animal care area. Depends on your provision. Just to get people used to being in each of the classroom and talking about teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that 100%. And I find the difficulty with this, though, and as much as I absolutely agree with this, I floated this idea. Well, I did a recent CPD in February because we had a staff development day in February, and I ran a CPD session on adaptive teaching, and I got a lot of interest from people because obviously adaptive teaching, we all know it's a buzzword at the moment, and I think a lot of and it might move on eventually to something else, but at this moment in time, that's exactly where researchers tell us that what we need to do. And when I ran a session on this, at the end, one of my colleagues said, "Oh, that's really good." So I'll tell you what it is that I did in the class. It kind of dipped into it last week on the show, or the fortnight before on the show, but I'll just for the benefit of anybody who didn't hear the show, I basically said I use a lot of whiteboards, and what I do with them is I'll ask them a closed question to begin with. And I asked the people in the CPD session, I said, what would you do if one person writes something immediately and then the other person writes nothing? Or if somebody else writes nothing, who would you go to first? And there was a bit of discussion around the fact that the one student isn't making sufficient progress, so you would try and get them there. But then I sort of made the idea of, I sort of mentioned the point that this other student who has completed the work, we're now, the clock's now started on their time wasting, if you like, and it's about making sure that we do both of them. And in fact, the one who is not writing anything, they might still be thinking, so that there's an opportunity to leave them for the time. Anyway, we went through this whole thing about that, and I told them how I did it, and one of the colleagues said, "Oh, could I come into your class and see how you do that?" And I said, "Absolutely, 100%. You tell me when you're free. This is my timetable. Please, please, please come in if you think you can benefit from it." And then I said, and then afterwards, if you like, I can come into your class and see if it's worked. And immediately, where they almost just completely closed up and were very reluctant to do that. And I thought, what a shame, because exactly what you're saying there about how we should be sharing practice, there's obviously something there that stops them from doing that. And this particular member of staff was fairly new to teaching, but I wouldn't say they were brand new to teaching. And it's almost like there was a bit of self-conscious there, or they don't want to be embarrassed about somebody else coming in. And I just thought, what a shame, because the whole idea of peer sharing would be an excellent idea. Do you do that at your college? Does that work well?
Yes, in some areas, yeah, they do that. And then they have time where they have like staff team time, and they share, or they might share points and ideas in the staff room on a share board in their staff room. So I've tried this today. Can you try that? So we've launched teaching how-tos, and around the sets around teaching how-tos. So we may have a theme of learning walks that are looking at how teacher how-tos are being used in the classroom.
Yeah.
Or last year in October, we had a training day with Inner Drive. So it may be a case of, right, we're going to look at how you've put that science of learning around cognitive overload or retrieval within your session. And the learning walks are just kind of going in, seeing it either on the planning or in action. Because obviously if staff have done a CPD and they've invested their own time to do CPD, some staff then get quite excited at showing you. They may share it on LinkedIn, they may share it on an email, they want to put it on a TLA tile and share it to staff. They may choose to keep it private because they are generally a private person. Yeah. And it's about respecting all those people. So before, when you said with your colleague that wanted to see you doing it in practice to upskill himself, it's almost like sometimes we get this habit of a trade-off where I've given you something. So I'm not saying this is what you were doing, but some staff do this. Where, well, I've given you something, so what do I get in return? Yes. And rather than it being that approach, more of it is about that collaborative staff team getting together. So with our supported experiments in learning, for example, we've got staff across all different sites doing different subjects that are coming together, and their supported experimental learning is about using Teams or audio to do text to talk to capture feedback live in the session. So rather than it being something that's delayed or something that's captured later, they capture it live using text to talk or talk to text, and use that strategy. Then we've got some other areas that are using feedback diaries or reflective journals. Because not only can students be reflective, I think as lecturers, when we have our own schemes of learning or our lesson plans, we annotate them because we reflect on how that went. And again, with adaptive teaching, there's a reason why adaptive teaching has become at the forefront and focus, because there is statistics that have shown that not all students learn the same way. So when you deliver to a group of students and they all get it, great, they've all got it. But what about the ones that haven't got it? How do they get it? What's in that environment that helps them? So do they have a self-scaffold that they have at the start and they take it away? So, for example, if you have got whiteboards, you may have some students that don't need the whiteboard and they're quite happy to be confident and say it verbally. They may wish to use the whiteboard to record their answer. They might prefer to work in a pair and discuss the answer together and then put it on a whiteboard. At the start of the year, we have things where we have students that have thumbs up, thumbs down, or red cards or green cards. So if they're anxious or nervous because they're meeting new students and they're not confident to talk in the classroom, they have a period of time where they may choose to just use the green card once, but they have to use it at least once. That expectation that you are expected to engage verbally at least once.
No opt-out.
And then when they feel that they've done their bit and they're getting anxious, they can turn it to a red card. It's like, I've done that, now I'm not ready to do any more. But then as time builds, they get more confident and that green card stays out more. And eventually the green and red cards disappear. So by you get to October half term, you come back and you don't need those cards because everyone's got that environment. So there's that expectation that we've all decided as a class. Here's our expectation. Here's our class agreement, if you like. And it builds that supportive, encouraging culture. And it's about doing more of that. So teachers supporting teachers, educators supporting educators, sharing good practice. On CPD days, maybe having teachers that go into, say, a practice session of another teacher and they see how that's done in practice for the ones that are confident enough to do that. Because not every teacher wants to be out there on a platform and people sharing. They don't might not, like you said before, that new teacher may not feel ready to. May want to practice it a little bit longer first and then might come to you in another month or two and say, actually, I've really got that cracked. I know what I'm doing. Do you want to come in and see it?
Yeah.
And everyone's confidence level and everyone's skill level is different as an educator. You know, I don't mind what day of the week someone comes into my room. And I'm not preaching saying, oh, you're going to see an absolutely amazing session. I'm going to cram everything in. But it's about, here's my session. I know what I'm delivering. I know why I'm delivering it this way. The students, more importantly, know what they're doing and why they're doing it that way. And then it's just ensuring that there is learning taking place. You know, students are making progress to where they're either, you know, progression route is or their course or their exam or their grades or expected targeted grades. And it's having a supportive developmental culture.
Yeah.
And even if you've got staff that get a lesson visit and they get really, really positive feedback, you know, that they're exceeding, like you said before, with the terms that you use in your organisation, there's always something new that's there, like AI, for example, or a different organisation that's linking to that specialism, whether it's car valeting or whether it's going out doing a catering kitchen. There may be a new chef that's got a new type of strategy or a new type of method that they want to learn. It's keeping ahead of the curve as staff, as tutors.
Yeah, and I mean, so from my experience as a teacher being observed, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've always had the same thought of, well, I actually want my observer to see that, as you've just took the words out of my mouth there, really ahead of the curve. You know, I am innovating. I am, my practice is, beyond what is expected, really. And because I aspire to do more into teaching and learning, and I want my observers to be able to say, yeah, actually, Chris is the one who should be helping out with teaching and learning because of the practice I've seen. So you're absolutely right. No matter what stage you are in your development or whatever stage you are in your career, there's always a reason for the observer to come and see you and check how you're doing as well. I think with our college, we actually get the option. So when we're pinged, we actually get the option as to when we're observed. So we get to choose the lesson and the time in which they come in. I don't know. Do you have a similar experience with yours, or do you tell them when you're coming in?
So they'll have a notification, and then there's like a window during that time frame where that will happen. So I think from organisation to organisation, it's very different depending on what but the outcome is usually the same. You know, it's about looking at development of the staff or the student, or what is needed. Is a student experience a positive student experience? And I think, like you said before, around deep dives, almost like mimicking what Ofsted do with classroom visits. If a member of staff is in a classroom and they ask a student, "Oh, so do you do this every week? Is this your usual lesson?" You get a feel as an observer when you walk in the room whether that's the usual practice or whether it's something different. You kind of get, and students will also share that. You know, they'll say, "Oh, we don't usually do this," and it's about that teacher who's in that room at that time, you know, doing what you always do. And like you said, being ahead of the curve, because as educators, that is our job. I know it's a busy job to have, but we choose to be in education either because we've got an interest or a passion, or, you know, it's not something you just fall into accidentally. You make a conscious choice to want to be in education. And when you see students that are learning and they're understanding, and that's amazing. And then when the students that maybe need some more support or adaptive strategies to help them understand it, that feeling you get when students are progressing is a wonderful feeling. And I get that feeling when I do it with staff. So when I'm in with staff and I'm doing a lesson visit and supporting staff, and they say, "All right, I really understand what you mean by that now. Thank you so much. I'll put that on my action plan, and I'll do that CPD, or I'll come to that session, or I'll put that idea, that teacher takeaway into practice." And staff have that gratitude of, "You've been in my room, and as an outcome of you being in my classroom, I've got an action plan, and you've helped me to become better in whatever that focus on that action plan was." And it's about that supportive approach of supporting our staff, making them feel valued, developing them to feel more confident or positive, or have more understanding around that specific area. And whether that's experienced staff, because I know myself, I've been in education teaching for 20 years. You do have your style, you know, and sometimes you can have that habit of, well, I've always done that during induction, so I'll just keep doing that because it works. And then sometimes you want to try something new, because you think, you know what, I'm going to try this in my induction weeks because I think it might be really, really exciting. Some students love it. Some students prefer the thing that you've done for the past 5 years. But again, you get a feel of what your students like and what your students will engage in. But as an educator, experimenting with assessment methods or questioning techniques or student group work or a new resource or embedding a video or whatever it is you're doing, it's never done with the intention of it being a pass or a fail. It's whether it works and whether it allows that teaching and learning to take place.
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about experimenting, I absolutely think it's imperative that teachers take gambles sometimes, knowing that that what you're planning to do with that gamble would, if it pays off, the dividends are incredible. And I always find that when I try something new, I get really nervous, it might be something really simple, but it's different, and I'm thinking, I get really nervous, but I'm thinking, do you know what? I'm going to break through this because I really want to see if this works. And 9 times out of 10, it often does. And it's really good when that happens. And I think the message that you're saying to our listeners, and I think it's the message that I'm getting from you, and certainly what I'm trying, what I'm hearing is that if you're in that position where you are, you're a bit nervous before a visit, it's probably fine to be nervous because it's part of your, it shows you care, it shows that you want to do the best, but not allow it to take too much of your time up, because if you're doing what you do normally, then that will shine through. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Yeah, and I think if you've got a high number of staff that feel that way, what can the college do, or what can that kind of establishment do to support staff that feel that way, to help them to overcome it? So is there some sort of, the staff can video themselves and reflect on their own practice and actually see how good they are? Or do they look at their own practice and think, actually, I could have done that better? Do they have a trust buddy that they can pair up with and say, right, I really want you to give me some feedback on this? So you're not having the person that you dread come in the room, but you're getting used to that feedback and that critical, developmental, constructive feedback that you're developing yourself as a tutor. Because ultimately, we are going to have people in our rooms at some point in our career whether it be an external inspector, whether it be someone that you get in as doing a deep dive, whether it be a classroom visit, whether it be a member of staff that's kind of coming in as part of your ping process. But ultimately, it's about getting used to that environment. And if it's a confidence thing with that member of staff, how they can develop that themselves and pair up with someone or reflect on themselves and look at how they do improve if they do lack confidence. And I think, it's preparation. If you're prepared and you've got a lesson that you're delivering and you feel good about what you're delivering and you understand it, you've got a subject knowledge, things sometimes do go wrong. And there might be an activity that students don't want to engage in because it's not for them. So then, within that session, you may adapt that strategy to suit. You may have a lesson that's planned and you want to get so much done because you've got to get it all covered because there's an exam coming up. But some hidden learning might take place that you don't want to miss. So you might have to move that little bit onto the next session because you don't want to miss this hidden learning that's just suddenly come from a student and you want to explore that more. Maybe it might be a misconception over getting a sum wrong in maths or a misconception about a certain view on something. And you don't want to just move on from that and leave that there. Yeah. So with an educator or a tutor or a teacher, that is your environment. You have charge. You take control of that environment. And when someone comes into it, maybe you feel a little bit like you're not in control because rather than your kind of attention being on your students, you are aware that this other person's in the room and their attention's on you. And that can be an uneasy feeling. But it's how you as an educator get over that feeling of feeling uneasy and have that belief in, I know what I'm doing is well. I do it well. I know I am planned. Whether someone is into affirmations and they do affirmations, whether it's a training need and they want to just get better at it by doing more training. There are loads of avenues that educators can take to improve their practice. Whether it's going to see another educator or whether it's going to a CPD session. But ultimately, it's that fear of failure, maybe. Maybe it's the fear of failure.
Do you know, I was listening to a podcast the other day, completely unrelated, by the way. I will just say it's completely unrelated, but it's a podcast called Stick to Football, and it's just about ex-footballers talking about things. And one of the words they used to describe a performance from a team recently was that they bottled it. And we said, well, what's the definition of bottling it? And when you look it up, it actually is the fear of failure. So when you mention the fear of failure there, I'm not demeaning anybody by saying this, but if they don't overcome that fear of failure, perhaps they are bottling it in that sense. And in that, part of their professional development could be to accept and own the fact that you are a little bit, nervous about this and to be able to do something about it. But yeah. So what we need to do, Helen, we're going to take a quick break. It's only a minute long, the break. We're going to just hear from our sponsors one last time. And I've got one last question to ask you. And I just wondered how you feel about this. So I'll ask you the question and just give you a bit of a chance to think about this. So how would you feel knowing that if you're going into a lesson observation, that the teacher had spent hours just preparing for that one lesson? So I'll just take it to a break and I'll just give you a chance to think about that.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
So thank you for that. Just question on that, because I did a bit of, before I came on the show today, or this week, I've spoke to a couple of my colleagues, but not just colleagues in my college. I spoke to colleagues at other places as well, because I'm an examiner for my A-level politics, for the A-level politics qual, and I spoke to a few teachers from there, spoke to a few teachers from other schools in different phases as well, not just in colleges. And I just asked them this one question. I said, if you were getting observed next week, how long would you spend getting ready for that? And some of the responses were absolutely alarming. Like, some of them said they would spend a couple of hours preparing for that one lesson. I mean, from an observer point of view, would you expect that?
So I think firstly, if you have an organisation where they announce observations, then no matter what time of day that lesson is when someone comes into your classroom, your lesson should be the lesson you've planned for anyway. So I prefer, and this is just my preference, it's not what my organisation do, but I prefer unannounced observations, if I'm honest. And this may cause some upset around people, but if you are in a job and you are providing a service, so whether you're a doctor providing support to a patient, no matter what day of the week someone comes in there to see you being a doctor providing support to a patient, you're doing your job. Whether you're a nurse in a hospital, no matter what day of the week somebody comes in to see you being that nurse in the hospital, you're always providing some form of service to that patient. So within education, as an educator and a tutor, you're always providing an education experience to those students. So no matter what day of the week somebody comes in, for me, what is it about that person's practice that they're not always doing that maybe they should be? And it's that accountability and that ownership of, we are all in a job that we are paid to do. So no matter what day someone sees you doing that, you know, it's a really tricky one, because you don't, as an educator, I wouldn't want someone spending hours and hours and hours delivering a lesson that they wouldn't normally deliver. Because that's defeating the objects, that's putting unnecessary strain on a member of staff. Wouldn't you prefer to be effective or consistent or, you know, exceeding or whatever it is all of the time, or knowing that you're good all of the time, or knowing that you're like doing your best all of the time, rather than having to feel like it's a bit of a show? And I'm not saying that that's what staff do, but if you're aware you're being observed in that lesson at that time, but that lesson wouldn't normally look that way, why would you do that?
Yeah, and it's a bit like the old quote that everywhere the Queen went, she smelled fresh paint, wasn't it? And I think kind of, you know, perhaps maybe that's the view from the observer as well. But I'll tell you what they said. So I asked them this question. So it's interesting you say, what is it that you're doing in that time, or what is it that you feel like you need to spend that much time in? I asked them this question, and they said it's not that they... so a few people have said this, actually. They said it's not that they... how did they say it? I'm just trying to remember how... They said it was quite poignant what they said. So it's not that they spend hours planning, or that they're spending hours doing different things, but they're spending hours showing or proving that what they normally do is there. So they are... you know, maybe they've got a seating plan that they prove that they do this regularly, or that their scheme of learning just needs to be updated so that they're proving that they're doing this regularly. It's just more, I think it's more the providing the evidence of normal practice that's taking the time, rather than doing anything differently with their lessons. I don't know if that makes sense.
So I think in our organisation we have a scheme of learning, and staff populate that scheme of learning, and then it's annotated. So, you know, you can see that on the scheme of learning there may be weeks that have been shifted around due to something that's gone on, or there may be a tutor that's made a note of something, like, for example, a student's broke their arm, so they've made a note on that week to make sure they send that work on Teams, or they chase up that file and put the extra resource in that file when that student comes back. So it's a live document. And then if you're in your practice and you are doing feedback effectively, and you are, you know, giving timely feedback, whether that's written, verbal, or you've evidenced it somehow, if you've got that effective practice and you're doing that as part of your practice on a daily basis, then really then as your own kind of managing your own workload, you're not then having to spend 2 hours marking the books for the past 2 weeks because you're getting observed in the next day or two.
Yeah.
But it's how you embed that in your session. So, for example, we may have some tutors that spend a lot of time marking a little assessment they've done in that lesson for starting points. But rather than you do that, if it's not going to be going to an awarding body and it's just for a starting points activity, why can't you then get the students to peer assess? And then they do a collective marking at the end. So you've not spent all that time going through every single one. So it's about adapting your strategies. And that's just one example. I'm all for supporting staff with workload. I appreciate the workload of a teacher is vast. And it's how we get savvy and smart in our own practice that we are working smarter and not harder. Yeah. You know, do we use SMART targets, for example? So if you've got a group of students and you set bespoke, individualised, personalised targets for those students, whether it's a high needs focus, personal development focus, an academic target, over time, over the course of a year, it's a lot of targets for that individual. And if you've got 33 students in a class and they all need that, then they all have 3 or 4 progress points across the year to review that. It's an awful lot of work. But it's how we can put procedures and strategies in place that help us as educators to manage that, how our tracking documentation, how we plan that within our scheme of learning, how we make time set out of that in September or in August when we're doing our planning. So we know in that lesson that week, we've got that dedicated time slot for that activity. So then you're not having to take home all them extra workbooks or go back onto that online system to put all those comments in or feed forward that praise reward or that action point or that behaviour note or whatever it is. It's how we can develop our own skills in that. And it may be that the college systems may need to look at how that works to allow for that.
But either way, I think you're absolutely right in what you're saying there. And I think either way, it all comes down to the fact that staff need to be more vocal with any concerns they have around learning visits. I think that's the thing that's really coming out of this today, that the college practices may be in place, the structure's there, and no matter what period of or whatever point you are in your career, you can still be observed and such. But any trepidation should be vocalised more, and I think that is a really that's more or less come out of every point that you've made today, whether it be explicitly or if it's been inferred. But absolutely right, that needs to be considered as we go through. I just wondered as well, Helen, just as almost a final point here, we've talked about from a teacher's point of view trepidation and stress and all sorts, but what's your we haven't really discussed the sort of stress from an observer's point of view. Is it, do observers feel the stress in this situation, or is it?
Yeah. So I think as an observer, when you're in an environment where whether you're in that person's room, that's their classroom, that's their environment, and when you're in there and you see activities or you see practice that you want to share and you want to celebrate because they're doing amazingly well, or whether you're in that room and the lesson's not going well, and whether it's due to planning not being visible, whether it's due to the engagement of the students, whether it's due to the methods that are being used, it is a difficult situation to be in as an observer, because you are there to see if effective learning or if learning is taking place and if students are on the right track and if things are in place that should be in place for teaching, learning and assessment. And I remember the first time I gave feedback to a member of staff that wasn't the outcome that they would hope for.
Yeah.
And I got emotional because nobody wants to tell someone and nobody wants to hear that they've not done well, whether that's whether you're learning to drive a car, whether that's when you're in a classroom delivering to students. And then some staff will say, you know what, I know that I wasn't good at that, and I know I need to do something about it. I just don't know how or what to do.
Yeah.
And I think when you've got that open trust, like one of our values is trust and respect. When you're with a member of staff, it's not there to kind of put them under a microscope and be critical of them. Yeah. It's that bit of that session that wasn't great, not the person. The people are amazing. We have so many amazing staff. And every now and then you may get an observation or you may get a lesson visit or whatever you call it, where it's not gone as well as you'd hoped for whatever reason. You may have something going on in your personal life. There may be something that had happened just before that session. A student may have disclosed something quite serious to you, but in that moment you're capturing what you see as an observer. You capture what you see. And at the end of the day, it's about being respectful, being trustworthy. And I will get staff to say, here's your action plan around the session. And many times I'll meet with them after that and they'll already come with things that they've created or devised. Like one recently created this amazing peer assessment document that wasn't there in the session that I'd been to, but has created that and it exists now. And they could say to me, if that existed in my session when you came, I would have not got that on there, would I? Because they know that themselves. So it's about being honest and open and transparent to say, here's what I need to develop. I know that it wasn't there. And then you get some stuff that say, well, if you'd have been in there an hour before, you would have seen that happening. Yeah. But then you get the planning documentation and you do an audit on the planning documentation. It's not a reference there. Yeah, so if it's not on the planning documentation, It's not in the work scrutiny. It's not in the classroom.
Yeah.
Where's the evidence? Where's the? How can you show it's taken place? Not so much evidence, but how can you show it?
Yeah.
So that's why we do have, our process of planning, because it's important to plan and schedule why you teach and what you teach and when you teach it. But as an observer, it can be. But I always think it's always around development. So I'm either celebrating and someone else is getting development from this person because they're going to share it.
Yeah.
Or we'll put on a CPD day around what needs to be developed and shared with staff to support them with their training needs. Or it might be a one-to-one bespoke coaching session around their own self-belief, their coaching, how they can develop themselves, whether it be around their own confidence and self-belief, or whether it's around the strategies or the tools that they use within that teaching environment. And whether they do that via looking at, books that's out there, or they go online following blogs, or they do some search and discovery for themselves. They go on to Winner Drive. They use the teaching how-tos. They link with other staff across different colleges and make a network. However staff liaise and support and develop themselves, because let's be honest, as educators, we're always doing some form of personal development ourselves to improve our practice.
Yeah.
And it's about embracing excellence. Teaching and learning and assessment, it all matters. It matters to us as educators. It matters to us as managers and quality assurance. It matters to the students and their parents and carers. It matters to employers, because we want to ensure that when our students come to us, they are getting the skills, the knowledge and understanding and behaviours of what they need to progress within their end destinations and their outcomes. But as staff, we need to we do have attainment, we do have kind of achievement rates. So there is that side of it too, that, when we have the kind of outcomes that are all logged on the systems, and it's right, how are we looking at as an organisation? What are our expected goals? That's all there because there's a purpose for it. There's a reason why we have the data that's collated. There's a reason why we have supportive sessions or classroom visits for our staff. And ultimately, it's all about development and improvement and embracing excellence.
Well, I think that is an absolutely perfect place to finish on. And I think I just want to make the point as well that from a teacher's point of view, that we can often underestimate just how much of a human being the observer is as well. And for you to say that you get emotional is absolutely, it just shows that the people who are doing the observing, especially if their main job is within teach and learn assessment, that they're there as human beings to help other humans just develop and just, as you say, be the best person they can be. So I think that's an absolutely perfect place to finish. And I can't thank you enough for being on the show today, Helen. I just think that the insight that you've provided today will certainly help my practice, but certainly help anybody else who is either listening live or will listen back to this. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you very much for today.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
And I hope we speak soon as well. And if there's anything you're doing in the future that you would like to help that you'd like me to get involved with, please always feel free to get in touch.
Oh, so definitely. I'll hold you to that. That sounds great.
Yeah,
I think we do care. We do matter. Us as teachers, managers, students. It's all about that kind of collective environment where we are open, transparent, and honest, and we want to aim towards developing ourselves, developing our students, and working towards that common goal and doing it with respect. So, I don't have any sort of power attached to my role, because it's not about that. It's about the support side of it. It's about the improvement and that, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? What can our team do to help you?
Yeah.
And whether that's share good practice or develop practice, there's always a positive outcome at the end, because ultimately staff that have took on the action plans and done the personal development or gone to the CPD have sessions where they showcase that, and they've come full circle and their action plans close the loop, because they're amazing in that area now and they feel more confident in that area now, and they want to then showcase how good they are in that. So eventually that journey is a positive journey, but I can appreciate why some people do feel negatively about it. But it's about changing that culture and that supportive environment so it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks so much for your time today, Chris. I've really enjoyed it.
It's my pleasure. And I just want to just finish off with just a nice round of applause for you. And actually not just yourself, Helen, but just for everyone who undertakes teaching and learning and helps teachers develop. So this one is for you.
Thank you.
So
I think we all should pat ourselves on the back, all the
Yeah,
volunteers and you yourself, because it is a tough job sometimes doing what we do. But thank you.
Of course. Well, that is all for today. So thank you very much for your time. You can listen back on Spotify or anywhere else you get your podcasts from. Until next time, thank you very much.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.